Okay, we're looking at the resurrection principle today, and by that I mean that we are looking at the spiritual idea that is presented in the story of Jesus' death on the cross. We are all very familiar with that particular story. We're familiar with the narrative that goes around it, and I think most traditional Christians will say this is the most important idea or the most important event that happened in Christian history, and that this is the epitome of the Christian holiday, or the Christian recognition of the importance of this whole process. And the idea is that Jesus died on the cross, was resurrected, but died for our sins, died to cleanse us of, or give us the opportunity to accept him as our personal Savior, which would then ensure the entrance into the kingdom of heaven at the point of our death. And we take a little bit different view of this because there is truly a principle behind the whole story. And Jesus himself, I think, is the one that laid it out. And I don't know how many people pick up on this in the traditional world, but it's a very important idea. He said, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Many saw this as a prophecy of that he was making, predicting his death on the cross. And this is probably not true, because the Gospel of John was written about 90 A.D., about 60 years, I guess, after the death of Jesus. And if you look at some of the scholarship that's out there on scholars that look at what they consider authentic sayings of Jesus, this is not included in them. But it is a very important idea. It's a very simple idea, but it goes totally with, and I think this is why John included it in his gospel, it goes totally with the whole idea of crucifixion, resurrection. And it goes back into nature. It's a natural law. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground, into the earth, and dies, that would be the Jesus in the physical body being nailed to the cross. And a portion of his life is coming to an end. And of course, all of his followers at this point were devastated, because the Messiah, the expected Messiah, was not supposed to succumb to the enemy, was supposed to overcome the enemy. And it looked like Jesus was failing in his death. But when did Jesus have the most impact on the world? While he was alive or after he died? And the answer easily is after he died. So unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Now, the question of whether or not the Christianity we know today is a reflection of the actual teachings of Jesus, we'll never know, because we don't have a gospel according to Jesus. We have gospels according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we have Paul's letters. But we do know that the effect of his death was one of just an explosion. Christianity's, I think, the largest, if I'm not mistaken, the largest religious movement on the planet. And it's all broken up into all kinds of sects and so forth. But it's a pretty significant movement. But that's the idea. Something dies and then something comes out of that. And so what we want to do is look at, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to us? And what he's pointing out here is what we're seeing all around us right now. We're seeing the resurrection of something that has died. And in truth, it really doesn't die. There's a thread that runs from the seed to the full-grown plant. There's a life force. If you take a single seed, put it in a jar, it'll grow as a single plant. It's from that seed. There's no intervention. There's nothing that jumps in there and takes over. The seed becomes the plant because the plant is wrapped up in the seed. This is the whole thing. But what happens if you take a seed and hold it in your hand for the next 10 years? Not much. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't die to its seed self. So the principle here is that something dies so that something else may come forward. It's illustrated in Jesus' life and death. You had the man walking the planet doing the teaching. You had the death, and then you had this resurrection and this explosion of influence. That's the resurrection principle. You go in as one thing and you come out as another. It's not something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's happening right now, and it's happening in each one of us. It's a very amazing thing when you see plants coming up. I think that's why we all love spring so much. It's miraculous. Even though we see it happen all the time, it's still miraculous. None of us know how it works. We can study it, we can study the process, we can see what's happening beneath the surface, but none of us know how to unfold a seed. Have you ever done that? Go home and cut open a bean, see if you can find the vine that will come out of it. You can't find it. It has to die to the bean self so that the vine, the seed, the plant side of that may come out. So it's a principle, it's a process, and there are several illustrations of that throughout nature, but the most important one is us. Is how does this relate to us? Is there something in me that must die so that something in me can come forward, can be born again? And the answer is yes. And that's what this spiritual path is all about. We're going down this path, we're studying all of these wonderful ideas, and we're trying to get enough information in our head so we as a plant will start growing. But if we find that we study and study and study for years and nothing really changes except our attitude or belief system, we begin to believe all of these ideas are correct, but my life still is not so wonderful. Then we have to ask ourselves, am I actually engaged in the resurrection principle? Am I engaging the resurrection principle? Is there something I'm hanging on to? And I think most of us can say, yes, there is. There is this seed self. I call it the self-image. It's called the natural man. It's called the personality. The surface man. It's called the man of the flesh, the woman of the flesh, the person of the flesh, whatever's politically correct. I don't know what is. Paul wasn't too politically correct, but it's us. It's all of us. It's the human being. There is a spiritual dimension to us that we understand intellectually. We have an idea of what that is. I'm a spiritual being. I got that. But am I living out of that spirituality, or am I living out of my personality, my self-image? And my life will reflect whatever it is I'm living out of. So, say you're in a situation that is very negative to you. You wish it were gone. You pick up a book, read to try to get inspiration to see another way through this problem. What you are looking for is a resurrection. You're looking for a birth. You're looking for a lifting up of your source of power, your center of power. So in order to do that, you stop looking at the problem, you stop fretting over the problem. That's what we do, and it's habitual. We all do it, we're all guilty of it. And it doesn't matter that we're guilty of it. What matters is that we recognize when we're doing it. You've got a problem and you dissect it. It's just like when an event happens, a negative event happens in our society and the media, plays it over and over and over and over. And that's just in the first 15 minutes. It's like we focus and we dissect the problem. We become the problem. We're not dying. We're not dying to the problem. We're not letting it go. I was going over some stuff by Thomas Trord, and I know many of you know who he is, some of you don't. He was one of a very influential New Thought. He was a judge, actually, and he was in India. He was a British citizen, but a judge who oversaw a district in India way back before, while India was still under British rule. But he was a brilliant metaphysician, a brilliant man that understood the spiritual principles that govern our thinking, our being, everything. And he did not really take a religious approach to it. I would recommend reading him, but I would also recommend do it slowly, because he is. You've got to just think about it. You'll see this, and this is one of his most important statements. And you may be scratching your head over it by the time I'm done, but hopefully you will clear it up. He says, "My mind is a center," and this comes from the Dore Lectures, D-O-R-E Lectures, the book, which I think we have a copy, at least one copy back there. My mind is a center of divine operation. Just get that sense right now. My mind is a center of divine operation. Just kind of hold that thought. And I'm not talking about my intellectual thinking. I'm talking about mind as a whole, my being. My mind is a center of divine operation. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression. And this means the production of something beyond what has gone before, something entirely new, not included in past experience, though proceeding out of it by orderly sequence of growth. Okay, just to bring this down to earth, that's what a seed does. You plant a seed and something happens, something starts happening. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression. The seed starts doing something different. And this means the production of something beyond what has gone before. The plant is becoming something different from the seed, something entirely new, not included in past experience. The plant has nothing to do, does not relate to the seed after it begins to develop, though proceeding out of it by orderly sequence of growth. You with that so far? Okay, we got another page here. Therefore, since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, whatever it is that makes that seed grow, since it can't change its nature, that's just what it does, it must operate in the same manner in me. Consequently, in my own special world, in which I am the center, it will move forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have gone before. Okay? You're in your situation you're worried about. There is a natural process occurring. He's saying, don't hang on to the seed. Don't hang on to the you that brought this about, that maybe is responsible for attracting this situation or whatever. Who sinned, this man or his parents? They ask of Jesus, of a man born blind. Jesus said, don't worry about that. It doesn't matter how you got here. What matters is this process, this divine operation that is occurring. There's something in you that's pushing for expansion. And so as we let go of the perceptions we hold of the problem, I think that's why Eric Butterworth suggested that we stop calling it problems and call it a challenge. Or more, another interesting perspective he gave was call it a hobby. Because you don't think, oh, I've got to get up and do this hobby. I hate this hobby. If I could just give it up, I'd be happy. We do hobbies because we want to. And a plant goes through a very interesting process, I'm sure because it wants to. It's the innate process. And so we look at the situation we're in, instead of looking outside of ourselves at that issue, at that thing, that condition, we recognize that there's something. Therefore, since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, something in me is trying to expand. It must operate in the same manner in me. So it's doing it. He's not saying, let's pray and get God to get on the job here. We assume God's already on the job. This expansion process is now occurring. I might be clinging for dear life to the problem. And think about that. Like the news, you go over and over and over the problem. And you understand the problem so well. And then there's another one. And you do the same thing. I say you, I say we. It's our cultural training. There are people that think if you're not worried about your problem, you've got a problem. You're not responsible. Let's all sit down and worry about our problem here. Let's have a Problems Anonymous. We can all sit down and go over our problems over and over and over again. But we don't want to do that. We want to go over the resurrection. And I'm not saying that support groups do that. I'm not saying that at all. But sometimes the support groups we pick out for ourselves do that. I'm totally miserable. You call up your friend and talk to them until they are sure you're totally miserable also. And they really feel for you. They don't know what to do, but they're miserable too. So you've accomplished your goal. So we can either cling to the thing, which is what we do, and I would say naturally, but that's not correct. We normally do that. There's a big difference between normal and natural. Remember I talked about that a couple weeks ago? Normally you'll fret over it. Naturally, you do what the seed does. You let go. That's our natural thing. Since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, it must operate in the same manner in me. So it's happening now. That's the push. Why do you want to be free? Because you're already free at the deepest level. And that freedom is coming out. Why does the seed do what it does? It'd be a lot easier just to hang around and do nothing. It's safer to be a seed, not be dropped into the ground and die. Consequently, in my own special world in which I am the center, and we've talked about that, if you disappear from your world, all of the circumstances that relate to you are gone too. You are the center of your universe. That's not an egotistical statement, it's just the way it is. When you plant a seed in the ground, it becomes the center of its universe. It draws its nutrients, it draws from sunlight. Unlike the seed next to it, it has to draw its own. So we are the center of the universe, and not in a sociopathic, egotistical way. That's the way we're designed. We are each individual expressions of the infinite. We're not the infinite. We're expressions of the infinite. And we express that as our personal life. We have the ability to make decisions that are unlike the person sitting next to you. That's what we're here to do. It'd be like giving everyone in this room an easel with paints, set of paints. And we put a plant up here in the front and say, let's all paint this plant. Do you think we're going to have any two paintings that are alike? Would one painter stand up and say, mine's the best? If you can't equal this, you're not good enough. Would that work? We would all express this process in a different way. And that's what makes it interesting. And wouldn't it be interesting to go around and see how we all do this? We all do it differently. We do have a problem with that, though. We don't always like it when people don't paint like we do. And so we'd like to fix that, and that becomes our problem. Another thing we hang on to. So we have this, I'm the center of this world. It will move, consequently, in my own special world in which I am the center, it will move forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have gone before. That is always better than what has gone before. So part of our healing, moving process is letting go. That's a huge part, actually. It's letting go of the old, stop going over and over and over. And that's hard to do. It's difficult to do because, again, probably most of us were brought up to think that if we're worried, we're responsible. And if we're not worried, we're irresponsible. And I've seen people do this. They try to pretend like they're letting go when they're really not. And that's a judgment, I realize. But you can tell by how there's a stiffness about us when we say one thing and do another in a sense like this. But anyway, he's talking about this process, and it's happening now. So just think of your own personal experience as we're going here. The idea of resurrection, or to resurrect with the Easter story, is to restore a dead person to life. That's what we celebrate, right? That's the Jesus thing. And that is part of it. That's an interesting part. It's a big part, but as far as the practical application to your life, it plays very little part. The other meaning of this is to revive the practice, use, or memory of something to bring new vigor to. And this is really how resurrection applies in the resurrection principle. We're remembering the truth about ourselves. When you're worried about something, you develop tunnel vision, and all you think about is the problem. You forget all the other things. You forget that you like to paint, that you like to go out and take pictures, that you like to just do, whatever you like to do. And you focus only on my life is bad because this thing is there. So resurrecting is remember who you are. You're not subject to the power of this appearance. You may be given it power, but that's your choice. The real you is greater than this thing. Again, a difficult thing to remember when you're hurting or when you're in a situation that looks like it's bigger than you are. But that's where this practice comes into play. You go sit down someplace and with the idea that I'm going to let this go. But don't just let it go. Take on something. Resurrect something. Resurrect that sense that I'm okay. I am greater than this thing. This power that is unfolding through me now, creating better, grander circumstances, is at work. I don't have to ask it to start. It's never stopped. It's always in play. That's one thing, I think, one mistake we make with prayer is prayer is not like a key that we put in our ignition and turn. Okay, God, you're on. Come and fix me. It's like that process is always occurring. Prayer, as I have said many times, is to make an adjustment. It's adjusting your thought to what is happening. And Trord pointed out what's happening. There's this expansive process occurring in us at this very moment. It's coming out of conditions as they exist in your life now, creating greater conditions. It's a very important idea. Not just an idea, but when you sit down to let this go, to recall that, and you'll get a better feeling about things. Okay, I don't know the answer, but it's coming. It's like a receptivity, an expectation. I've said that faith, just if you don't understand the word faith, replace it with expectation. It's the same thing. You have faith in God, but what do you expect? That's two different answers, probably. Two different things. But make them one. What do you expect from God? What are you expecting for your life? You're praying for an answer. Do you expect it to unfold? This or something better is what we like to say. So you won't limit the answer. So we are remembering, we're reviving the memory of something to bring new vigor into ourselves. To bring new vigor just simply means to remember who you are at the deepest level. The deeper the problem, the more we forget who we are. And I'm speaking from first-hand experience. We all know what that means, but we don't really understand the dynamic while it's happening. This problem's causing me to be miserable. The answer to that is really no, it's not. I'm causing myself to be miserable looking at that. I'm looking at that and saying that must make me miserable, and so I'm reacting. But call your friend up, have them come over and look at that with you. They won't be miserable. So that thing must not be making misery. They look at you, maybe you make them miserable because you're so miserable. But the problem doesn't have the same impact on everybody, is what I'm saying. If it did, then it would affect everyone in the same way. If you see a red hot burner on a stove, you could take 1,000 people, have them put their hand on it, and they'd all get burned. Every single one of them. That's not open to perception. That is a fact. But you could keep the burner off, and you could hypnotize those people, and you could tell half of them that it was ice cold, the other half that it was absolutely hot, and the ones you told were hot would end up with scars, with a burn. It's very strange. We're very susceptible to suggestion, and when a condition suggests to us that we should be miserable, we usually respond in kind. Is it possible to break that? That's what we're talking about here. To be born anew. There's several examples of this, and I'm going to just throw them all up here for the sake of time. Baptism. How many of you have been baptized? The ones that didn't raise your hand, see me after the service. Will. What happens when you're baptized? Okay, then what's that mean? You wash your sins away. You go in as a sinner, come out as what? Free of sin. Isn't that the seed? Dropped in the ground as one thing and come up another? You die to the old self. That's the theory. For those that the theory doesn't work, there is confession. You got to pay for it, of course. It's a good business. I should start that. I hear your confessions for nothing. You know, I could, well, I'd probably have to do a Schedule C on that if I did that. But anyway, so baptism, you go in as one thing, come out as another. And I don't care how you think of it. I was immersed in a baptismal fount. And I truly felt that I came up another person. I felt that something happened until about a month later. Then I thought, well, I'm not feeling this anymore. So I would ask my minister, should I do it again? He said, no, you're okay. Just go away. So you see, the other one is the seed. Drop it in the ground, comes up something else. Butterfly, what happens there? It's this thing that crawls around. Pretty soon it wraps itself up in a mantle, goes through a period. I like to think of that as meditation. It comes out something else. That's what we're seeing. That's the resurrection principle. You go in as one thing and come out as another. But where does that other thing come from? You know, where does the one free of sin come from? It's not like a spirit comes and occupies your body. It's you. You're remembering something. And basically, I think the value of that exercise